When I was working on the case for Israel, I had the opportunity and what I considered to be the privilege to spend some time with Honorable Erwin Kotler. And what I realized was that I was getting to know somebody who was not only a great leader, but was an incredible individual who was filled with modesty and humility. And what I saw also was that there was hardly a political prisoner in the world that wasn't being aided in some way by Erwin Kotler. When the case for Israel came out, and one of the premiere screenings was in Philadelphia, I was sitting next to Erwin, who was the keynote speaker for that premiere, and he turned to me and he said, "You know, Gloria, the next film really should be a film on anti-Semitism." So, in all candor, we would not be sitting here this evening if it wasn't for the Honorable Erwin Kotler. And I am honored to be able to welcome him up here this evening. Thank you.
I want to really pay tribute to Gloria Greenfield for this most compelling film. Let there be no mistake about it. Without Gloria, there would be no film. No documentary of the kind that we have witnessed this evening of this oldest and most enduring of hatreds, of this lethal obsession, as Robert Wistrich has referred to anti-Semitism, of this pandemic of anti-Semitism that we are witnessing today, which led Elie Wiesel to open up the film as he opened up our international conference to combat anti-Semitism a year ago in Ottawa by saying that he feels a sense of urgency, indeed even a sense of emergency. And as he added, that I have not felt this way since 1945. He added the very compelling words, "Now is the time to mobilize the conscience of humanity to combat this most enduring of hatreds." And I suspect that he was thinking of two things, certainly others, but I will just close my word just with these two things. The first is the danger of state-sanctioned genocidal anti-Semitism. And I use my words very carefully when I say this, but I know no other words to describe that which is the combination of the most toxic of hatreds. The incitement to anti-Semitism, and anti-Semitism, the most enduring and oldest of hatreds, together with genocide, the crime of crimes, together bringing about the most toxic of combinations, whose epicenter today is Ahmadinejad's Iran. And I use that term to distinguish it from the people and publics of Iran, who are otherwise the targets of mass domestic repression. But there's another phenomenon of anti-Semitism, which is also no less dangerous in its own way. The first, the state-sanctioned genocidal anti-Semitism, which is not only Ahmadinejad's Iran. You find it in the covenants and the charters and the platforms of Hamas and Hezbollah, for example, which are not just terrorist organizations. They're organizations with a genocidal objective, not because I say so, because they proclaim it. They're anchored in an anti-Semitic ideology, not because I say so, but because they affirm it. But it is not only that genocidal anti-Semitism that is so dangerous. It is today the laundering of anti-Semitism, as we see it in the film, under all the things that are good, all the things that we care about. The laundering of anti-Semitism under the protective cover of the United Nations, where Israel, yet again, at this annual assembly of the United Nations General Assembly, there are more resolutions condemning Israel than the rest of the international community combined. I'm not saying, and nobody's claiming, that Israel should be above the law. All that is being asked for is for equality before the law, not to be singled out for differential, discriminatory, and prejudicial treatment, where it is laundered under the protective cover of human rights. If human rights is spoken of, and it is, and has been now for 35 years, as the new secular religion of our time, then if you can portray Israel as the major human rights violator of our time, then Israel emerges, so to speak, as the new geopolitical antichrist of our time. And finally, laundered under the struggle against racism. Let there be no mistake about this either. The worst thing you can say about anybody in the world today is to call them a racist. The very label supplies the indictment. No further proof, so to speak, is required. And so, if you can indict Israel with the two great evils of the 20th century, of apartheid, which is defined in international law as a crime against humanity, then you say that Israel must be dismantled. It has no right to be, because it is a crime against humanity. And if that is not enough, you call it a Nazi state, so that we have an obligation to ensure that there is no Israel, almost a kind of perverse moral obligation to do away with it, because it is an apartheid, a Nazi state. And that's why this film closes with a call, really, to stand up and be counted. Because in the world in which we live, I regret to say, there are too few people who are prepared to stand up, let alone to be counted. And if I may, Gloria, because you mentioned about political prisoners, just several days ago, I agreed to undertake the legal defense of Michael Nabil. He was one of the early leaders of the Tahrir Egyptian revolution. He then became the first political prisoner in post-Mubarak Egypt. As we meet this evening, he's under the 80th day of a hunger strike, having been convicted and imprisoned for insulting the Egyptian military. You know what his crime was? During the Tahrir revolution, he was one of those who said, as the blogger and wrote, that the army and the people are of one hand. That was his hope for the Arab and Egyptian spring at the time. When things began to turn the other way, he then wrote in his blog, "The army and the people are no longer of one hand." For that, he was tried and imprisoned and sentenced to prison for 3 years. And it is that which has spawned the 80th day of his hunger strike. And I'm mentioning it this evening because we need to do what we can to free somebody who I might otherwise say, and I suspect this may have been related as well to his continuing imprisonment. One, he is an Egyptian Cop, which is the minority Christian community that is under assault in Egypt. And second, he wrote against the anti-Israel and anti-Semitic incitement that he was witnessing in Egypt, and expressed his concern that the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty might run aground. So for standing up, in effect, to combat anti-Semitism, for standing up on behalf of the minority Christian community, for standing up against the betrayed hopes of the Tahrir Square Egyptian Arab Spring, and we all shared those hopes, he's now languishing in prison on the 80th day of a hunger strike. That is why, and I think this is what Charles Small was also indicating in the film, that while it may begin with Jews, it doesn't end with Jews. And the struggle against anti-Semitism is really our collective struggle for democracy, for human rights, for freedom, and human dignity. Again, I commend you, Gloria. This was a marvelous film, and I think it warrants being seen and inspiring audiences across the world on the importance of standing up and being counted against this most radical evil, indeed the paradigm of radical evil today, anti-Semitism. Thank you.